In the last section, we finished up a small example of creating a car object and a Toyota object. We're now going to refactor all this over to ES6. So I'm going to take all the code that I have on the screen right now, and I want you to kind of at least somewhat keep this in your memory, okay? Kind of like how ugly this is, how much code there is to make something that is relatively pretty, not a lot of functionality going on here, but we had to write a lot of code to make it happen. So I'm going to take all this code, and I'm just going to, boom, delete it. Okay, so now we're going to refactor, we're going to rewrite all of that using ES6 classes. So the idea behind a class is that we're going to bypass the step of having to set up that constructor function, worrying about the prototype, worrying about all that inheritance boilerplate and all that kind of weird stuff that was going on. So let's write our first class out. Classes have a little bit different syntax compared to anything else that we've seen in JavaScript so far. So let's write out our car class to start and see what it looks like. To create a class, we write the class keyword and then the name of the class and then a set of curly braces. And so just doing this like so gives me a class object of car. When I create a new car, or excuse me, when I create a class car, I can then call new on it and get a instance of car. So now this lowercase c is an instance of car. Right now I'm not assigning any properties to it, no methods, nothing like that, so it just appears to be an empty function. Let's try to add a method to this class now. To add a method inside of a class, we use the enhance object literal syntax. So remember, the entire idea there was that when we are using enhanced object literal syntax, whenever we want to write a function, we no longer use something like :function, the function keyword. Instead, we can just write drive, set of parentheses, and then an open and closing brace. Then once we're inside of here, we can add any custom logic we have for this method. So in our case, we might return vroom. Now on my instance of car down here, I can call car.vroom, car.drive, and yep, sure enough, I get back vroom. Okay, so not bad here, not bad. But there's definitely one thing that we're still missing here. We can add a method, like this looks pretty clear, but we still need a place to set the title property on the car. So in the example that we had before, we had a function called car, which was our constructor. In the ES5 world, when we combined the new keyword with that constructor function, it would run that constructor function of car and do some initialization or setup of our object. So we need to have some similar functionality within this class where we can do some initialization or setup. To handle some initialization or setup inside of a class, we define a very special method which is called constructor. So this constructor method right here, you could think of it if you're familiar with any other language or you've learned other languages over time. You could be called something like, or you could think of it as init or initialize or create, just something that will be invocated or ran whenever the constructor, whenever we use the new keyword on the class. So we want to pass in some options object to the car right here, and we want to provide in the title. So we'll make it Toyota by default. So now our constructor object will be passed a single object, our constructor method will be passed a single object, which is the options object right here. So here's our options object, and then just as we did before, we could say this.title is options.title. By the way, if we wanted to do a nice little refactor in here, we could also do some destructuring off of the options object. So if we wanted to do that, we could remove the options object, put in our curly braces to indicate that we wanted to destructure a property, and then say, I want to get access to the title property off of that object. And then inside of the method, we wouldn't refer to options anymore. We could just refer to title. So now if we look at car, sure enough, yep, we got a title of Toyota. Perfect. Okay, so we now have something a little bit equivalent to what we've had before. And best of all, we don't have any reference to any kind of mysterious prototype property whenever we want to add a method here. So let's continue in the next section and work on setting up our Toyota class, which is going to inherit from the car class.